following segment is presented in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. It has become painfully clear that there is a fentanyl crisis in our country. It is killing people at record levels in our communities. And those of us with a little bit of common sense also realize that there is a direct tie to what's happening at the southern border. The vast majority of fentanyl that is killing people on our streets is coming from Mexico. Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers of Washington State's 5th Congressional District did something really interesting. So Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers chairs the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and she actually brought that committee down to the southern border to have a field hearing in McAllen, Texas, to talk about these issues. Here's part of that hearing.
It's putting Americans all across this country at risk, turning every town into a border town. More people than ever are dying from fentanyl poisonings. Most heart-wrenching is that fentanyl is an attack on the young generation. The number one leading cause for death for Americans between ages 18 and 45 is fentanyl poisonings. Last month, in my hometown of Spokane, Washington, law enforcement from Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the Spokane Police Department seized 35 pounds of meth and 50,000 fake pills believed to be laced with fentanyl.
The Congresswoman was nice enough to join me alongside Spokane County Sheriff John Nowels to talk about this scourge of fentanyl and what can be done. Congresswoman, I understand you had a trip down to the border?
Yes, as the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, we held a field hearing at the border just last couple of weeks. We were down at McAllen, Texas. There were 15 members of the committee that traveled to McAllen. We were focusing on fentanyl and the staggering amount of fentanyl that's coming across the border right now, really turning every town into a border town when it comes to the risk involved with fentanyl that we see in places like Spokane now, and really highlighting that the open border policy by the Biden administration is putting Americans at risk at every town across this country. And I think what's most heart-wrenching for me is that fentanyl is an attack on the young generation. It's now the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45 years old. And what we're trying to do is stop the flow of fentanyl, the fentanyl related substances, illicit fentanyl that's being smuggled across the border, produced by cartels in Mexico. But the precursor ingredients are being manufactured and produced in China. They're really being sourced in China. And what unfortunately is happening today is that criminals and drug dealers are selling these deadly substances in communities like Spokane. Spokane's now one of 11 crisis cities for fentanyl in the United States. And unfortunately, it means that a lot of people are losing their lives. It's tearing families apart and communities apart. And we need to take action to stop the flow of fentanyl and stop these deaths that we're seeing in the United States of America.
I want to talk more about that border visit in a minute. But Sheriff Nowels, when you hear that, and when you hear from the Congresswoman that Spokane is in a fentanyl crisis, you're the sheriff for Spokane County. Does that ring true to you?
Oh, it absolutely does. Just to give you some numbers related to Spokane County specifically, our Department of Health recorded a 186% increase in fentanyl-related overdoses between 2020 and 2021. Those are the most recent years that we have the data on. But between 2017 and 2021, in just a 4-year period, Spokane County alone saw a 1,233% increase in fentanyl-related overdoses. 12 times increase in just 4 years. And we expect that we'll have at least another 100% increase in fentanyl-related deaths in 2022. The numbers are not final yet, but that's what we expect. So that should paint a pretty grim picture about what's happening in Spokane County. And I promise, it's happening in every community across the state of Washington. It's happening in every community across this country. Fentanyl is so inexpensive, so widely available that it is just flooding our communities. And this is poison. This is not, we've always had a problem with substance abuse in America, but fentanyl is so dangerous. It is so fatal to young people, old people, and it does not matter what socioeconomic class people are. It doesn't matter what race they are. It doesn't matter what religion they are. It is absolutely negatively impacting our homes, our communities, so wide and so broad. It is fatal, just lethal to our communities right now.
And before I ask the Congresswoman a little bit about what she saw at the border, is there any question in your mind, Sheriff? I mean, you know what investigations you're running, the suspects you're arresting, who the players are. Any doubt in your mind the direct nexus to what's happening at the southern border?
Oh, absolutely not. In Spokane, specifically Washington State, 90 to 95% of all of our illicit drugs, and I would say almost 100% of our fentanyl is coming across the southern border. That's a well-established trafficking route, and it's that way for the Western United States. So, no, there is no doubt in my mind that the issues going on at the southern border, that the lack of any kind of law enforcement presence down there to stop drug traffickers is really it's just wide open traffic. It's doing nothing to slow them down.
Congresswoman, I've been down to the border with some politicians for some very carefully orchestrated photo opportunities, walking through parking lots with CBP, kids in cages. Did you get a real tour of the border, or did you get a watered down tour of the border?
Oh, we went out, we met with, we spent time with Customs and Border Patrol, the agents that are on the ground on the front lines. They testified. So we had a field hearing, and they testified, as well as the sheriff and some others, to really give us their perspective. And then we went on a night tour, just to better understand, see firsthand what is happening on the Rio Grande River there, and just see what, in real time, what is happening at the border. And I can tell you, it was disturbing to me. We have a significant public health crisis on our hands, and not only the numbers, the 4.5 million or more that are estimated to have come across in the last 2 years, and the horrific stories of children and women, and how the sexual assault and abuse, and just the impact on people. But then the reality of the fentanyl that is coming across the border, and the stories of Customs and Border Patrol trying to take action, but yet they told us that they believe maybe they're getting 5 to 10% of the fentanyl that's estimated to be coming into the United States by what they're able to do right now at the border. And that's why we went down to the border to highlight the situation on the ground, to have Republicans and Democrats be there together to have this hearing, but also to be able to visit and ask questions. But ultimately, my goal as the chairman of Energy and Commerce is to find real solutions that are going to turn the tide of this crisis. And that's where we're working on legislation to halt fentanyl, to permanently place fentanyl related substances as a controlled substance in the United States as Schedule 1. And I believe we need to do that permanently. The DEA administrator has told me the same thing, that we need this in place to really ensure that local law enforcement all across this country have the tools that they need to keep these poisons off the streets.
And quickly, you said you were able to hear from Customs and Border Protection agents. I've always had this kind of question about, obviously we know that the security, the hard security at the southern border is not optimal. I mean, that's how you get so many people who are able to come across. But do they see most of the fentanyl coming across those unsecured areas, or through official ports of entry?
They will tell you that what they are able to capture is through the official ports of entry. The large majority of what they are able to prevent from coming into the country is through the official ports. But as I said, they also are estimating that they're only getting between 5 to 10% of the fentanyl that's coming into the United States. And you have the official ports, but you also have a very long border along the southern part of the United States that has a lot of wide open spaces that is of grave concern to them.
Yeah, and I guess you kind of don't know what you don't know, so it's hard to pinpoint how much might be coming across some of that land border. Sheriff, when it comes to the federal government, I think I look at a lot of public safety issues, which I do see this as a public safety issue, obviously, as being kind of hard for the federal government to help with. What could you get, or what do you want to see from the federal government, from the Congresswoman, that you think would help with the everyday crisis that you're experiencing and your deputies are encountering?
Well, I think the federal government absolutely has a role down on the border and making sure that we are putting as much security in place down there to keep drug traffickers from bringing narcotics over the border. Second of all, I personally, and sometimes this is not necessarily a popular viewpoint, I believe that if the federal government would impose minimum mandatory sentences on people who are distributing large quantities of fentanyl in our communities, that is going to be a huge deterrent. If a drug trafficker knows that they're going to spend 15 years in prison if they are selling fentanyl in our communities, then they're probably going to think twice about selling it. Let's be serious about holding people accountable for distributing drugs that are absolutely killing people in our communities. The other role the federal government can have with us, we all are aware how much technology plays a role in our lives, between social media, the way we text and communicate with each other. A lot of our tech companies are allowed to operate, or allowing drug traffickers to operate sort of anonymity. Even if we have search warrants that are asking for data, a lot of times our tech companies are saying they don't have the encryption keys for the data that goes between two users. Therefore, they give us a bunch of encrypted data that should be evidence for us, but nobody can read it. They also will say sometimes, well, that information you're looking for is stored on a server overseas, and your court order, even if it's a federal court order, has no weight, no jurisdiction there. So I think the federal government, and particularly the Energy and Commerce Committee, could probably give us a lot of help. And I know the Congresswoman is really looking at this hard for us in getting some legislation that requires big tech to sort of be good neighbors. I'm not asking them to just give us information. We want them to require a court order, but once we have the court order, make it a law that they actually have to comply with it. They can actually give us the evidence that they do have and can get.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious though, Congresswoman, and maybe you know the answer to this. TikTok is a Chinese product. And so I've heard that's, I talked to a mom last year whose son bought an illicit pill and died via TikTok. And I guess, how do you regulate that?
Well, under Section 230, under Section 230 and the liability protections that our social media platforms enjoy today, they have a responsibility to be moderating, to be controlling the illegal, illicit material that's on these platforms. So they are already, they should be subjected to that requirement. And the story that you shared about the mom who lost her son on TikTok is repeated way too many times. I've talked to too many parents who have found themselves in that same situation. We've already had a hearing and a roundtable in front of the Energy and Commerce Committee this year. Sheriff Nowels participated in one of the roundtables. We also had a mom from Spokane that I've gotten to know, Molly, who lost her 23-year-old son, Carson, a couple of years ago. The day after Thanksgiving, he purchased on Snapchat a pill, thought it was Xanax, and instead it was laced in fentanyl, and he died. These stories, I've met with too many parents who are beating this drum, who are raising the attention as to what's going on these social media platforms. We have the CEO of TikTok testifying in front of the Energy Commerce Committee later on in March, and this will be the first time that TikTok has been in front of a congressional committee. And we are going to be asking him some really tough questions about what is happening on his platform, whether it's fentanyl or other negative impacts that we see from TikTok as it relates to young people and mental health concerns. But also we have a lot of national security concerns about what's going on with TikTok. But this must be an all hands on approach to prevent the sale and transfer of these illicit drugs on these platforms to protect our children.
Well, and you mentioned children, and I think that's important because, what really bothers me about the crisis at the southern border is so many people talk about it in these black and white terms. Either it's a humanitarian crisis and only a humanitarian crisis, or it's a security crisis and only a security crisis, when very clearly it's both. And I guess, what do you think it's going to take? Is it, focusing on what's happening to our kids? What do you think it's going to take to make both sides really come together to do something about the fentanyl and the situation at the southern border and how it's contributing to the death of kids?
Well, as a mom with 3 school-age kids, I can tell you that it's terrifying. And I know that I'm not alone. And so I am appealing to my colleagues here on Capitol Hill that we must take action to protect our children. And as it is the biggest attack on our kids, it's now the number 1 killer of 18 to 45-year-olds. I've been over and met with senators and appealing to them as to the importance of taking action for our kids. It's estimated now that we're losing 1 every 7 minutes to fentanyl in the United States of America. It's more than are dying of suicide, guns, and car accidents combined. So this is a huge crisis, and we need to get the fentanyl. We got to stop the flow of fentanyl into the United States. We do need to address the addiction increases that we've seen that have only been driven more by COVID and decisions that were made around isolation and shutdowns, that we have an addiction crisis on our hands. And fentanyl, sometimes it's feeding the addiction, but there's way too many stories. I've met with many parents who have shared that their kids were not addicted. They were poisoned by a pill that they bought thinking it was something else. Or now we have fentanyl being packaged as candy, right? Really targeting younger children in our country more than ever. And so we're going to keep the pressure on. We need to act, and we need to take action very soon, as soon as possible.
Have you found any willingness from other members of Washington's congressional delegation, any Democratic members who seem willing to try to deal with this issue in a meaningful way?
To date, the Democrats have been concerned about the mandatory minimum provisions in the legislation. I actually sat down with the White House drug policy director today, pursuing an agreement. We got to get some agreed upon language so that we can schedule fentanyl related substances as illegal, permanently schedule them in the United States. We're operating on an emergency order right now. We include in this proposal the research around, because what happens is that the China that's supplying a lot of the raw ingredients that come to Mexico, they keep changing the mixture of these pills. And so the process to schedule illegal substances, they keep changing just the mixture a little bit. And then we have to do we're put on defense again. So we want to do the research, and we do have to include the penalties. And what I appeal to them is that these are drug dealers. These are people that are causing havoc, and we need to, it's not that large of a number, but we need to have these mandatory minimums to ensure that there is a deterrent, and a very strong deterrent for them to continue this practice.
Yeah, it's interesting that there'd be pushback to that, because when I look at every single one of those fentanyl pills, I see a pill that can kill someone. And so, I understand that you don't want people in federal prison for smoking weed or something, but we're kind of talking about a different beast here. Sheriff Nowels, I want to ask you a quick unrelated question as we wrap up here. Well, it's related, but a little more nuanced. There have been some policy changes in Washington state. There are more policy changes under consideration. It's very difficult in this state right now to pursue someone if they flee from law enforcement. There's a bill under consideration that would remove the ability of your deputies to stop someone for a non-moving violation, like an expired tab, etc. Is that going to hinder, or is it already hindering your ability to get some of these drugs off the street?
Oh, it's absolutely hindering our ability to do all of these investigations. Kind of the basis for us to take law enforcement action over the last 3 years has slowly been eroded by the Washington State Legislature for all the reasons you just stated. I do think it's important to talk today a little bit about, this approach by the Washington State Legislature to treat drug addiction as a health crisis, which it absolutely is. My heart goes out to people who are addicts. My heart even goes out bigger to people who are recovered addicts. They're really heroic what they're doing. But here's the untruths that we're telling our community right now in the state of Washington. We say we want to treat it as a public health crisis. We don't want to arrest these folks. We need to get them into treatment. The lie is we are not providing treatment to people who are addicted. We're not forcing them into treatment. And if we do get somebody who is amazingly wanting to get treatment on their own, it is not available to them really at all in our communities right now, and certainly not available on the levels that we need. Fentanyl is a physically addictive drug. The people who are recovering from fentanyl addiction, they need medical intervention, and there is almost no medical detox beds available in most communities these days. Certainly not at the level needed. It's an incredibly expensive recovery process, and the resources just aren't in our communities right now. And that's the lie that's going on in Washington State right now. Is we're trying to say we don't want to hold them accountable by arresting them. We want to help them, but then we're not giving them the help that they need. So I think that's important for the citizens to understand and know.
Yeah, it's a complete system-wide breakdown, and I think I also struggle with how anybody could deny that. If the end goal is we want people to get better, I mean, we have to look at the system and say it's simply not working at any level. Congresswoman, we'll give you the last word. From your visit at the border, for folks who don't have the opportunity to go down there to see what Customs and Border Protection is doing, what is your single biggest thing that you would want Americans and your constituents to know?
Since the beginning of 2023, DEA has seized 4.5 million fake pills laced with fentanyl. And the Customs and Border Patrol has seized more than 1,400 pounds of fentanyl. There is enough fentanyl now in the United States to kill every single American. And that's, as we were talking about earlier, that's just the amount that's been seized. So how much have we missed? The southern border is 2,000 miles long. An open border policy has created this crisis in the United States of America that is really targeting our young people in particular that seem to be susceptible to the fentanyl. And so we need to take action. We need to take action immediately. We need to get fentanyl related substances scheduled as illegal in the United States. We need to support law enforcement, and we do need to do more to help those that are addicted or struggling with substance abuse. I worked on some legislation last year, bipartisan, and we got signed into law. We're going to do more this Congress because this is a crisis, and it's impacting people in Eastern Washington and Spokane. It's tearing families apart, communities, but it's unfortunately all across the country.
Well, please do keep us updated on those efforts, and hopefully there's some really good, positive, bipartisan work that can happen in that regard. Congresswoman Cathy McMorris, Rodgers, Spokane County Sheriff John Nowels, thank you both for your time and your attention to this issue. The preceding segment was brought to you in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org.